Welcome back to the deep dive. We are shifting gears a bit today. Usually we're looking at the cutting edge of tech or, some of history's stranger quirks. But today we need to go somewhere quite a bit darker.
Yeah, we do.
I want you to try and transport yourself back. Think late 1970s, specifically Northern England, Yorkshire.
It's a very, very specific time and place. And if you look at the socioeconomic backdrop, it's just grim. You're heading into the winter of discontent. You've got industrial declines, strikes, power cuts. The atmosphere was already heavy.
It was. And then, on top of all that, you introduce this specific predatory shadow that hung over the entire region.
It's a palpable fear.
We are talking about the era of the Yorkshire Ripper. And for anyone living there, especially women, this wasn't just a story on the news. It was a daily, visceral reality.
Absolutely. People were changing their entire lives.
There were effectively curfews in place, but not for the criminals, for the potential victims. Women were being told officially not to go out at night.
Which is such a profound inversion of civil liberties when you really stop and think about it. The fear was concrete. It literally changed the architecture of social life in the north of England.
Now, the subject of this is Peter Sutcliffe. And the numbers, they're just horrifying. Convicted of murdering 13 women, attempting to murder 7 others. But, and this is really crucial, our mission today isn't just to recite a list of crimes. We aren't here to dwell on the gore just for the sake of it.
No, because that's not the real story. The real story, the one that emerges when you really analyze the official inquiries like the Byford report and you look at the investigation timelines, is about failure. It's a deep dive into how a man, who was, by all accounts, a pretty mediocre criminal, managed to be interviewed by police 9 separate times.
9 times.
And yet he remained free for 5 years to continue killing.
That's the statistic. That's the one that just stops you in your tracks. So today, we are going to unpack the systemic incompetence, the information overload, and frankly, the cultural misogyny of the era that acted as a sort of blindfold for the entire investigation.
It's a perfect storm, really. You have a killer hiding in plain sight, and you have an investigation that was desperately looking for a kind of cinematic monster, a phantom that didn't exist.
Well, the real man was just, driving past him every single day?
His truck or his car. A normal guy.
So let's start at the source. Who was Peter Sutcliffe? You hear the name Ripper, and you immediately imagine this phantom. But he was born in Shipley, West Riding of Yorkshire, June 2nd, 1946. On the surface, just a lad from a working-class family in Bingley.
But that's the thing, isn't it? When you start to dig into the biographical data, that sense of normalcy just dissolves. It vanishes very, very quickly. The family environment was, to put it mildly, volatile.
Volatile.
His mother, Kathleen, was a Catholic woman, and she's described in sources as being deeply anxious. And you can sort of see why, because she was probably made that way by her environment. His father, John Sutcliffe, was a heavy drinker and a known abuser.
The sources I read mentioned that his mother suffered through her pregnancy with Peter under immense stress because of the physical abuse from the father.
That's right. Sutcliffe was actually born prematurely. He had to spend 2 weeks in the hospital right after birth. And that really sets a tone, doesn't it? Right from the absolute beginning.
It establishes a baseline of trauma.
It does. And the violence, it wasn't hidden. It wasn't behind closed doors. One of Sutcliffe's own brothers recounts a Christmas argument where the father, John, just smashed a beer glass over Peter's head.
A beer glass over his own child's head.
Yes. And the brother who witnessed this was only 4 or 5 years old. Imagine seeing that. It teaches a child a very, very specific and brutal lesson.
What lesson is that?
That violence is how the man of the house exerts control. It normalizes physical aggression and makes it a tool for conflict resolution. It's just what men do.
There was one specific incident from 1970 that I found just absolutely baffling. The sources call it the affair sting. It sounds like something out of a dark psychological novel, not real life. Can you walk us through that?
This is, I think, absolutely key to understanding Sutcliffe's warped view of women and sexuality. In 1970, his father, John, became convinced that his wife, Kathleen, was having an affair.
Okay.
So he decided he was going to catch her. He sets this elaborate trap, posing as her supposed lover, to lure her to a local hotel. But the real cruelty, the psychological damage, is in the execution. He took Peter and 2 of his siblings along with him.
He brought the kids to the stakeout to watch.
He hid them in the hotel. So when Kathleen arrives, expecting to meet her lover, the father jumps out. And in front of the children, he pulls negligee out of her handbag to shame her. It was a public ritualistic humiliation.
So Peter, as a young man, is watching his mother, the primary female figure in his whole life, being completely stripped of her dignity exposed as impure and just utterly dominated by his father.
Exactly. It fuses sexuality, shame, and male dominance into one single traumatic event. It's really hard to overstate the psychological impact that has on a young man's developing psyche, especially around gender roles and relationships.
So outside of this incredible dysfunction at home, his life seemed pretty aimless. He leaves school at 15, drifts through a series of menial jobs, but then we get to what the books call the gravedigger era in the 1960s.
Yeah, he worked at Bingley Cemetery. And this is where the profile really starts to darken significantly. His colleagues, the other gravediggers, noted he had a macabre sense of humor.
Okay, that's not necessarily a crime.
No, but he would volunteer for overtime, specifically to wash the corpses before they were buried.
He volunteered to wash dead bodies.
Yes.
That's a red flag the size of a billboard.
It suggests a deep fascination with the dead body, an objectification of the human form when the soul, is gone. It's about being able to have proximity to death, to a human body, without any of the danger or complexity of interaction.
Right. It's a powerless object at that point.
Precisely. But eventually he leaves that job and he becomes a heavy goods vehicle driver, an HGV driver.
And strictly from a criminal opportunity perspective, that career changes just everything, isn't it?
It gave him two crucial things: mobility and solitude. He had a legitimate, built-in reason to be driving all across the region at all hours of night. He could move between red light districts in Leeds, Bradford, Manchester, and nobody would question why a truck driver was on the road at 2 o'clock in the morning.
It was the perfect camouflage.
The absolute perfect camouflage.
At the same time, we're seeing these psychological warning signs really start to ramp up. The voyeurism.
Yes. In his late teens, he became obsessed with spying on prostitutes and their clients. And he wasn't just a passive observer, peeking through a window. He was actively stalking these interactions, following people.
The sources mention a theory about a con, that he had a bad experience with a prostitute and a pimp.
There is some speculation about that, yeah. The so-called lost 20 quid theory. Some analysts, and even Sutcliffe himself at times, tried to pin his entire motive on this one grievance, that he was seeking revenge for being ripped off.
That feels too simple.
It's far too reductive. I mean, think about it. Plenty of people get ripped off or have a bad experience. They don't go on to become serial killers.
Right. It can't be the whole story.
Exactly. The grievance might have been a trigger, a spark that lit the fuse, but the fuel was the deep-seated misogyny and the history of violence we just talked about. He didn't murder 13 women over 20 pounds. He murdered them because of a pathological need to dominate and destroy.
Let's look at his personal life, because this is where the camouflage becomes so effective. He meets Sonia Surma in 1967. They get married in 1974. They buy a house in Heaton, Bradford in 1977. To the neighbors, he's just a guy paying a mortgage.
He's living this seemingly normal domestic life while committing these horrific murders. But the domestic dynamic itself was fascinatingly inverted. Sonia was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia.
So she had her own serious issues.
Very serious. And by all accounts, she was the dominant force in the marriage. Gordon Byrne, who wrote a definitive biography, described Sutcliffe as being treated like a naughty schoolboy at home.
So the man who is about to unleash this campaign of terror on women in the streets is completely submissive in his own living room.
It's a very common paradox with these types of offenders. The violence becomes a way to reclaim the power and control that he feels he lacks at home. There were reports that he had to physically restrain Sonia during her schizophrenic outbursts, pinning her arms down.
That sounds incredibly stressful.
It was a high-stress, volatile environment, and it was compounded by fertility issues. They suffered several miscarriages and were ultimately unable to have children, which added another layer of strain to the dynamic.
So the pressure is building, both inside and outside the home. And that brings us to the escalation. Because the narrative that he just started killing in 1975 isn't quite right, is it? There were dry runs.
The lull before the storm is critical to understanding his development. The first documented assault was actually way back in 1969. Sutcliffe was out with a friend, a man named Trevor Birdsall. They were in a minivan. Sutcliffe gets out of the van, follows a woman up St. Paul's Road in Bradford, disappears for a few minutes, and comes back completely out of breath.
And he told Birdsall he'd hit her.
He admitted it. He said he'd followed a woman into a garage and hit her with a stone that he had inside a sock.
A stone in a sock. That's a prepared weapon. That is premeditation right there.
It's a crude kosh, yes. And here is the first major systemic failure. The police actually found him. The victim had been astute enough to note down the van's registration number. So they traced it, and they visited Sutcliffe at his home.
And he confessed to them.
He admitted to hitting her,
Yeah.
but he lied, he downplayed it, said he just used his hand, not the weapon. And because the victim, who was likely traumatized or just wary of the whole legal process, declined to press charges.
They let him go.
The police told Sutcliffe he was very lucky and left. They just walked away.
And what does he learn from that? He learns the lesson right there.
Yeah.
I can attack women, I can even get caught, and the system won't stop me.
That's exactly the lesson, and it gets reinforced. Later, in 1969, he's arrested again, this time in a red light district. And he has a hammer on him, a claw hammer in his pocket.
Okay, so that has to be it. Man in a known prostitution area carrying a hammer. That's intent.
You would think so, but what did the police charge him with?
What?
Going equipped for stealing. They saw a man with a tool, and their minds immediately went to burglar. They couldn't make the cognitive leap to sexual predator. He was fined a small amount and released. Categorization error number 1.
Unbelievable. So let's fast forward to 1975. The attacks begin in earnest now. And the pattern, the MO, is terrifyingly consistent from the start.
You have Anna Rogulski in July, then Olive Smelt in August. Both were struck with hammers, both were slashed with knives, and both of them survived, but only because Sutcliffe was disturbed. In one case by a neighbor, in another by a passing car. But Olive Smelt, she gave the police a piece of evidence that should have been the key to the whole case.
She heard his voice.
She did. She told detectives explicitly he had a Yorkshire accent.
Okay, so listeners, I want you to put a pin in that. Yorkshire accent. It seems blindingly obvious, given they're in Yorkshire, but that specific detail is going to be tragically, catastrophically ignored later on.
We also have the attack on Tracy Brown, a 14-year-old girl in a country lane in August of '75. Sutcliffe wasn't convicted of this until decades later when he confessed in 1992, but it proves his targets were never just sex workers. He was hunting vulnerable females, period.
Then, October 1975, Wilma McCann, the first murder. A mother of 4, she was the first to die. And with her, the modus operandi was fully formed. It was clinical.
Describe it.
He'd approach from the rear, incapacitate the victim with a hammer blow to the skull. That was to prevent screaming or any struggle. And then, once they were unconscious, he would stab and mutilate the body.
And the police response, it must have been massive.
Oh, it was huge. 150 officers, 11,000 interviews conducted, thousands of statements taken.
But no suspect identified. Nothing. And this is where the information management crisis really begins. They were using a manual card index system. Every single interview, every car sighting, every anonymous tip, it all generated a card.
And if you don't have a way to cross-reference those cards efficiently...
They're just building a paper mountain that ends up hiding the truth. The answer was in there, but they couldn't see it.
The so-called reign of terror really takes hold between 1976 and 1979. The frequency is just relentless. Emily Monica Jackson, in January '76, she was stabbed 52 times.
The brutality was escalating with each attack. He stamped on her thigh, leaving a clear boot print, another clue that wasn't properly utilized. But then look at Marcella Claxton in May of '76. She survived a hammer attack.
She was pregnant, wasn't she?
4 months pregnant. She miscarried as a result of the attack. She was able to give the police a photo fit, a composite sketch, but her testimony was largely discounted by the senior officers.
Why? Why would they discount a survivor's testimony?
Because she didn't fit their preconceived notion of a victim. In the police's eyes at the time, she wasn't a classic prostitute.
So this is where the investigation's own bias completely blinded them. They decided the killer only attacked a certain type of woman.
Precisely. So if a victim like Marcella Claxton didn't fit that narrow profile of a street sex worker, the police assumed it must have been a different attacker. They actually split the inquiry, which effectively meant they were throwing away crucial witness testimony that could have identified him.
This cultural attitude, this prejudice, it really comes to a head in 1977 with the murder of Jane Michelle McDonald. She was a 16-year-old shop assistant.
And this was the turning point for public perception and media coverage. The police and the press immediately labeled her the first innocent victim.
Which is just such a loaded, destructive term.
It's awful because it implies that the previous victims were somehow guilty. It creates this obscene hierarchy of victimhood. It reached its absolute nadir in 1979 when a senior detective, Jim Hobson, made a televised appeal.
I remember reading about this. It's chilling.
He addressed the killer directly on television, and he said, and I'm quoting here, "He has made it clear that he hates prostitutes. Many people do. But the Ripper is now killing innocent girls."
Many people do. He is validating the killer's hatred on national television.
He's trying to bargain with a serial killer. He's essentially saying, we understand your motive. We might even sympathize with it. Just please restrict your killing to the women we as a society don't care about as much. It's morally bankrupt, but it also likely emboldened Sutcliffe. It fed directly into his delusion that he was on some kind of mission to clean up the streets.
In the middle of all this horror, Sutcliffe makes a catastrophic error, a huge mistake. The murder of Jean Jordan in October 1977.
This should have been the end for him. He picked her up in Manchester, killed her, and disposed of her body. But afterwards, he realized something terrible. He'd given her a brand new £5 note.
And he knew that was a problem.
He knew. He'd worked in factories. He knew these notes were traceable to specific payroll shipments. He panicked. He actually went back to the body days later, a huge risk for any killer to try and find that note. He couldn't find it.
But the police did.
Yes. It was tucked away in a secret compartment in her handbag. The police found it, and they realized its significance immediately. They traced the note's serial number back to the Midland Bank in Shipley and Bingley.
So they had a geographical location.
They did. They narrowed the suspect pool down to 8,000 men who had received that specific run of new notes in their wages from a handful of local companies.
8,000 is a lot of people, but it's a list. It's finite. It's manageable if you have a system.
And Peter Sutcliffe was on that list. His company had received those notes. He was interviewed.
So he's sitting across from a detective. They know he got one of the notes. What happened? How did he get out of that room?
He provided an alibi. He said he was at a family party on the night of the murder. And the police, they just accepted it. They didn't push. They didn't check it thoroughly. They didn't check his car tires against the tracks found at multiple scenes. They were treating these interviews as a box-ticking exercise to clear people, not an in-depth investigation to catch someone.
Yeah.
They were just completely overwhelmed by the sheer volume of names.
So he slips through the net. Again, a massive, massive missed opportunity. But then, as if things weren't bad enough, the investigation gets completely derailed, utterly thrown off course. We have to talk about Wearside Jack.
This is the hoax that undoubtedly cost lives. There's no other way to put it. It is probably the greatest, most damaging red herring in the history of British crime.
So between 1978 and 1979, the head of the investigation, Assistant Chief Constable George Oldfield, starts receiving letters and, crucially, a tape.
A cassette tape with a man's voice on it directly taunting the police.
"I'm Jack. I see you're having no luck catching me." It was chilling. But the voice was distinct. It wasn't a Yorkshire accent. It was from Wearside, specifically Sunderland, in the northeast of England.
A Geordie accent.
That's right, and Oldfield. He didn't just buy it. He became completely obsessed with it. He staked his reputation on it. He decided, based solely on this tape, that the Ripper must have a Geordie accent.
So what did that mean for all the suspects who had Yorkshire accents? Like, for instance, Peter Sutcliffe.
They were deprioritized. They were moved to the bottom of the pile. If you didn't sound like the man on the tape, in Oldfield's mind, you weren't the Ripper. End of story. And this is where that crucial piece of evidence from Olive Smelt, the survivor who explicitly told them he had a Yorkshire accent, was just thrown out, ignored.
Did anyone try to warn Oldfield? Were there no dissenting voices? Oh, yes. The FBI's behavioral science unit and several dialect experts listened to the tape, and they all said, "This feels like a hoax. The psychology is wrong. The real killer wouldn't taunt you in this specific way." They warned him. But Oldfield had terminal tunnel vision. He ignored the experts. He was convinced he knew better.
And just to be absolutely clear for you listening, Wearside Jack was not the killer.
Not even close. Decades later, in 2005, advances in DNA technology identified the hoaxer. He was a man named John Samuel Humble, an alcoholic from Sunderland who was, by his own admission, just bored and seeking attention. He had zero connection to the murders. But his prank diverted massive police resources for over a year, during which Sutcliffe continued to kill.
It's just infuriating to even think about. Meanwhile, the major incident room is physically, literally collapsing under the weight of its own incompetence.
That's not an exaggeration. They had to reinforce the floor of the building because the filing cabinets full of index cards were so heavy. We are talking about millions of handwritten cards.
And Sutcliffe was in those files.
Multiple times. He was in there for the £5 note investigation. He was in there because his car, a Ford Corsair and later a Sunbeam Rapier, was spotted in red light districts hundreds of times. He was even in there because his old friend, Trevor Birdsall, had become suspicious and reported him to the police.
But the dots were never connected.
The system had no cross-referencing capability. It was all manual. Card A, regarding a car sighting in Leeds, didn't automatically link to Card B regarding the £5 note in Bingley. It was complete information paralysis. They had all the pieces of the puzzle, but they were in a million different boxes.
And while the police are chasing this ghost in Sunderland, Sutcliffe kills Josephine Whittaker. He kills Barbara Leach. In 1980, he kills Marguerite Walls and then Jacqueline Hill, university student. The terror is at its absolute peak, and yet the capture, when it finally comes, is so utterly mundane.
It's the definition of an anticlimax. January 2nd, 1981. It's not some brilliant piece of detective work that catches him. It's a probationary constable, a rookie named Robert Hydes, on patrol in Sheffield. He sees a Rover with false number plates parked in a driveway.
A simple traffic stop. That's what it came down to.
A traffic stop. Sutcliffe was in the car with a prostitute, Olivia Reevers. He's arrested for the false plates. But even then, he almost gets away with it. He almost destroys the evidence. At the scene, he asks the police if he can have a pee break.
He asks to go behind a storage tank or something.
An oil storage tank near where they were parked. He goes behind it, and while he's pretending to urinate, he quietly drops his hammer and a knife into the undergrowth.
And the arresting officers didn't see him drop them.
Not at that moment, no. They take him to the station. The case should have ended there, with him getting out on bail. But a sergeant, Robert Ring, just had a hunch. Something didn't feel right. He decided to go back to the scene.
And he found them.
He shines his flashlight behind the tank, and there they are. The hammer and the knife. The Ripper's toolkit.
If that sergeant doesn't go back on that hunch.
Sutcliffe walks. He almost certainly gets bailed on a minor theft charge for the plates and walks away to kill again. It was that close.
When they get him to the station and they strip search him, they find a detail that is just so bizarre but so telling. It completely undermines his later defense. The V-neck sweater.
This is one of the most chilling details of the whole case. He was wearing a V-neck sweater, but not as a shirt. He was wearing it upside down as pants. His legs were through the sleeves.
Why? What was the purpose of that?
The V-neck opening exposed his genitals, but the crucial part was the elbows of the sweater. They were padded. By wearing it on his legs, the padding from the elbows was positioned perfectly over his knees.
So it was padding for his knees.
Yes, it was to protect his knees and keep them comfortable while he knelt over his victims to mutilate them.
That speaks to a level of practical, rational, cold-blooded planning.
Exactly. It completely contradicts the idea of some frenzied, chaotic killer who has lost touch with reality. He was methodically planning for his own physical comfort during the act of murder.
He confesses pretty quickly after they find the weapons, but he offers up a motive. He claims God sent him on a mission, a voice he heard from a gravestone while he was working as a gravedigger.
The divine mission defense. He claimed the voice of a Polish man buried in the cemetery, a man named Bronisław Zapolski, spoke to him from the grave and commanded him to kill prostitutes to remove them from the earth.
Which sets up the central question for the trial in May 1981. It's the classic question, is he mad or is he bad?
That was the entire trial. The defense argued for manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. They brought in psychiatrists who said he had paranoid schizophrenia and wasn't in control of his actions. The prosecution, led by the Attorney General himself, Sir Michael Havers, argued he was a cold, calculating, sadistic killer who was using madness as a ploy, as a shield to avoid a murder conviction.
And the jury sided with the prosecution.
They did. They found him guilty of murder on all counts. He was sentenced to 20 concurrent life sentences. The judge recommended a minimum of 30 years, but in 2010, that was reviewed and changed to a whole life order, meaning he would never be released.
After the trial, the government knew it had to figure out what went wrong. The investigation had been a national embarrassment, a disaster. They commissioned the Byford Report.
This report is the definitive, brutal account of the systemic failure. It was written in 1982, but kept largely secret from the public until 2006. It laid everything bare. It confirmed that Sutcliffe was interviewed 9 separate times, but it also revealed something truly heartbreaking about his old friend, Trevor Birdsall.
The friend from that very first assault back in 1969.
The very same. In November 1980, just a couple of months before the final arrest, Birdsall's suspicions had grown so strong that he sent an anonymous letter to the police. It said, "I suspect Peter Sutcliffe of being the Yorkshire Ripper." He gave the name and the address.
Well, what happened to the letter?
It was lost in the paperwork backlog. It was buried in the paper mountain and never acted upon. And it gets worse. Birdsall was so concerned that he went to the police station the very next day to report his suspicions in person. That report was also lost.
You're joking.
I'm not. The system was so completely broken that a direct tip-off, naming the killer, from someone who knew him well was simply swallowed by the bureaucracy.
Sutcliffe spent the rest of his life in prison. He was eventually moved to Broadmoor High-Security Psychiatric Hospital after finally being diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia in 1984.
And his time inside was not peaceful. It was incredibly violent. He was a target. One inmate attacked him with a broken coffee jar. Another, in 1997, stabbed him in both eyes with a pen, blinding him in one eye. He lived in a constant state of fear, which is a grim irony given the fear he inflicted on a whole generation of women. He was eventually transferred back to a regular prison and died in November 2020 from a combination of health complications, including COVID-19.
Before we close out, we have to touch on the unsolved mysteries, because the official count is 13 murders. But the Byford report itself states that it is, and I quote, improbable that Sutcliffe simply stopped attacking women between 1969 and 1975.
Serial killers don't just take a 6-year break. It's not how their compulsion works. There's a whole list of what some call the secret murders, attacks that bear all his hallmarks. A man named Fred Craven in 1966. Gloria Wood in 1974.
And the absolute tragedy of Carol Wilkinson in 1977.
This is where the police's tunnel vision destroyed another life entirely. A man named Anthony Steele was convicted of Carol Wilkinson's murder. He was intellectually disabled and coerced into a false confession. He served 20 years in prison.
But he was innocent.
Completely innocent. He was exonerated in 2003. All the evidence now points to Sutcliffe. He worked near the crime scene. The MO was identical. Anthony Steele lost decades of his life because the police were under so much pressure that they arrested the wrong man just to clear the books.
So after all of this, what does it all mean? What is the legacy of this case?
Well, in terms of policing, it changed everything. The catastrophic failure of the card index system led directly to the development of HOMES, the Home Office Large Major Inquiry System. It's the computer database that British police forces use to manage major investigations to this day. They realized they could never, ever rely on paper and human memory again.
And what about the social legacy?
It sparked the Reclaim the Night movement. Women in the late 70s were absolutely furious that the official police solution to male violence was women, stay inside, lock your doors. They marched in their thousands to say, no, men are the problem. Curfew the men. We have a fundamental right to be safe in public spaces. It was a watershed moment for feminist activism in the UK.
You know, I think the most provocative takeaway for me from all this is about the myth of the killer. We want them to be criminal geniuses. We want them to be Hannibal Lecter.
We do. Because if they're evil geniuses, it somehow excuses the fact that we couldn't catch them for so long. But Sutcliffe wasn't a genius. He was a mediocre man. He was a bad driver. He was a sloppy criminal. He left clues absolutely everywhere. The traceable banknote, the boot prints, the car sightings.
He wasn't a mastermind.
He wasn't even close. He was protected by a system that was incompetent, that was overwhelmed, and that was fundamentally prejudiced against the very women he was killing. He didn't outsmart the police. The police outsmarted themselves.
And that is a very heavy thought to leave you with. How many other average men get away with terrible things, not because they are brilliant, but because we, as a society, are looking in completely the wrong direction?
It's a question that is, unfortunately, still just as relevant today.
Thank you for listening to this deep dive. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and we will catch you on the next one.